Hello and welcome to the Youth Ministry Mental Health and Substance Use presentation. My name is Jeremy Smith. I'm the founder of churchandmentalhealth.com. And just a little bit of background as far as understanding where I come from. So I have a history of youth ministry. I actually worked in the field for 8 years. I worked in a rural setting here in the United States. I worked at a military base as a contractor for military kids. I worked in an urban setting of about 250,000 people, and I got to experience all the different things. I did the games like food fights. I went to football games. I went to choir concerts. I did the pie eating contest. I did the pie volunteers. I pied teenagers. A lot of different fun stuff. I also trained the volunteers. I did discipleship. I fostered small groups. I was able to jump into discipleships, help parents, evangelize at McDonald's. I did all of those things. On the flip side, I'm also a licensed professional clinical counselor. I'm the program coordinator for a co-occurring program, which means mental health and substance use together when they combine together. I'm a supervisor. I have my own caseload that I work with. There's a lot of different rules that play with that. So when I come into this conversation, I want to be able to make sure that you guys understand that I'm coming from both sides of this. When we talk about church, when we talk about mental health, the whole idea of my website, churchmentalhealth.com, is to understand how to bring those two things together. So our conversation today will be, how do those things come together? And really the entirety of this summit has been about that conversation. So I want to kind of put the cards on the table for a second. I understand that with everything going on with COVID, with the fact that this is a web conference happening right now and there's this disconnect, I understand that at the fore of everything that's going on, I can sit here and ask you guys just to do one more thing. What one more thing can you do for your ministry? And to be fair, in everything that's going on, you've had to shift your mind frame of how to do youth ministry with everything going on. How do you do all those games and discipleship and everything else via Zoom? How do you try to continue to gather ties and evangelize and witness to people all online? Like there's something to be said for having good stage presence and a good sermon and being able to meet one-on-one with people, but it's a whole different world when we're trying to do things online. And I get it. I understand that things are really, really hard. How do you do planning for camps and go to events and find volunteers and train volunteers in a world that maybe you've never even done before? How do you work with parents? How do you create sermons that's it's just different, right? You're not playing to an audience, you're playing to a webcam. How does that conversation go? How do you do that? And you've had to figure all this stuff out. And now here I am talking about mental health and substance use for the youth ministry. I want to take a second and just to help you understand, with or without COVID, this is important. But I will say with COVID, with everything going on with the coronavirus across the world, that we need to understand that people are isolating. And us in our fully developed brain and mind and working with other people, that's one thing. And we're feeling it, right? I don't go to the grocery store the same way as I used to almost a year ago. I'm not connected as much in my church as much as I want to be. It's sometimes hard remembering some of the faces that I see there. But we have to recognize that for the youth that are developing socially, that are trying to figure out their place in this world outside of their family, that are trying to grow, that their brains haven't even fully developed yet, and their brains are trying to understand, how do I get into an argument with people? How do I have fun? Where are my boundaries with things? They're doing this in a completely different world right now. And so, as I'm talking about this, I want to make sure I sell you on the fact that this is not one more thing for you to learn. This is a paradigm for you to be able to understand mental health and know that the things that your youth are going through right now are probably more significant now than they were before. In fact, there are some statistics here in the United States that we're worried that because of everything going on with the coronavirus and the dysfunction of some of the family and the elongated time that we've been not in community, that the rate of suicide is going up, the rate of depression is going up, that the rate of people jumping into substance misuse is also going up. We're actually really, really concerned about it. There's also some positives that come out of this, and we'll talk about that later. But I want you to understand that I'm not asking for one more thing for you. Now, with all of this going on, I also understand that there's youth ministry burnout. So as I'm talking about this, I want you just to evaluate yourself and think, where am I with this? Because I know a lot, I'm part of a whole bunch of different youth ministries on Facebook, and not even just individual youth ministries, but collective youth pastors all getting together and talking with each other. And there's a conversation of what burnout is over and over again. This conversation of, guys, I just can't do it. Somebody posts something that talks a little bit about politics or a little bit about how they interpret theology, and things blow up so much more than it used to. People are on edge, people are frustrated, people are just kind of crispy at this point. So evaluate yourself for this. Now I'm going to do a couple of things and I'm going to do them backwards. Normally in a presentation, a conference, and a book, you sell all the stuff up front, you give them the kind of meat of things, and then you give them the good stuff at the end. You tell them, here's how you do it. I'm going to give you that second part because this presentation is actually about the other piece of it, all the information. So when we talk about what it means to understand and build relationships, we need to understand that within youth ministry, things are a little bit different. So I'm going to help you focus on three things with regards to mental health and substance use for the youth that you work in your ministries. The first thing is find and build relationships with counseling agencies in your area. If you need to do one thing with all the information I'm about to present to you, that's the first thing that you need to do. If you discover that one of your teenagers is struggling with depression or suicide, where do you go to take them? How are you going to be able to make sure that they get the help that they need? Go find the counseling agencies that are in your community. Go partner with them. Go develop relationships with them. It is not your job to be their counselor. It is your job to offer support. Now, if you don't know how to manage someone that's suicidal, that's fine. Know that you need to be present with them and then connect them with the resources that they need to. But where do you go? The difficult question about that is each community is different. Here in the United States, even from just state to state, it is a little bit different. Now, that's just within a federal government that is all under one system. The United States is different than Canada, which is different than Europe, which is different from Africa and Australia and Asia. So check in with your local communities, find some counselors and get to know them, understand if you would refer them to them, and then be able to make those connections so that if someone comes along, you've already done that piece. The second thing, and really the thing that we're going to be focusing on this, is educate yourself about substance use and mental health. I want to make sure you understand where things are at right now. 40, 50 years ago, unfortunately, at least here in the United States, if you were struggling with depression, we would say, cheer up, we'll see what happens. If we talked about psychosis within the church, we'd say you're demon possessed and push you on because it's not really our problem. Unfortunately, even before that, whenever we talk about the clinical side of things, the treatment side, when you would have a developmental disability like autism, we would actually put you in little places where you're removed completely from the community and you would live the rest of your life there. We don't have a great past of understanding some of this stuff. We give out medication that we think is helping with something, and we come to find out that heroin's not a good thing to be giving to people. We find out that it's creating methamphetamines, which was developed as something to give to people. Speed, if you don't know, 7-Up, the drink actually contained a stimulant in it because it was supposed to speed you up. But we don't think about these things, and so there's kind of a messy past that we have with this. So educate yourself and understand what's going on. And even more so with COVID. I don't have statistics on COVID because we're only like 7, 8 months into this thing. So we don't have those statistics. As they come out, as you keep educating yourself, let yourself understand what's going on. And then finally, after all of this, if you still have energy, find some resources online. Find some ways that you can be able to invest this into your community. There are resources out there. I'd highly encourage you to check out a guy named Dr. Steve Kursevich who talks about how to do inclusion ministry in your community. If you want to understand what it's like to be a youth that's growing up with people that have mental illness, whether yourself or a parent or a family member, read a book called Troubled Minds by Amy Simpson. She has a personal connection with that and details it very, very well. She's actually one of the speakers of this conference. So is Dr. Kursevich. Check out some resources that are out there. There's new ones that are coming over and over. There's places like Fresh Hope and Grace Alliance that have ministries that you can actually incorporate right away with youth or with adults in group settings to be able to have those communications community where they can hear about God. They can understand what that means. So We've talked about the conclusion, what you need to do with all of this information I'm about to share with you. Now let's talk about the information. And I want to make sure you understand that this is something as of now. With COVID, things could change. We'll talk about several different things, several different statistics. If you want to be able to get these statistics for right now, I'll have a link to this page that you can actually go explore the actual statistics, as well as the resources and the research that they came from. So the first one was psychoeducation and understanding of the statistics. When we talk about psychoeducation, that's just simply understanding where this comes from. So understand that we need to talk about what a diagnosis is first. When we talk about feeling sad, when we talk about being upset, we understand there's a difference for adults where I'm sad, I'm frustrated, and then needing to be able to calm ourselves down. If we lose a loved one, we may not have an actual diagnosis. If we can regulate ourselves, if we can move past that. Teenagers are a little bit different because they're going through puberty and everything is teenage angst. Everything is a little bit chaotic for them as well as for everybody around them. They're developing who they understand, maybe if they've gone through this development well, who they are within their family. If they have a mom and a dad and siblings that have other supports in their family, they're probably, potentially probably going to be saying, you know what, I know where I fit in with my family. I wonder where I fit out in this world. I wonder where I fit in my community. I wonder where I fit beyond that community. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And that's assuming that they have everything together. Now, what happens if dad's not in the picture? What happens if there's a significant medical problem that's happening for them? What happens if they have mental illness? They're going to struggle with making that progression. And so we have to understand that when we talk about diagnoses, that these are getting more and more tricky when we talk about teenagers. Their brain is not fully developed. For men, their brain doesn't fully develop until they're 23. Research shows that for women, it's actually 21. So when we talk about youth ages 18 and under, they're not even fully into who they will become. We would say, even for ourselves, God has provided us a path, and we haven't even gone fully into what's God's revealing in our lives. Of course, these teenagers have not either. We also have to recognize that when we talk about the impact some of this stuff has, that their health is involved. Their brain is being created, and so if we, with everything going on with the coronavirus, their brain is trying to figure out, how do I socialize? Their brain structure is literally getting created in a way that's completely different than everybody else that was not living through a pandemic before. And so we have to understand that we are needing to understand how to work within that situation. And so better understanding mental illness and substance use will help us interact with them. At the same time, we also need to understand that mental illness is something that affects more than what we actually assume. So 1 in 6 here in the United States, youth between 6 and 17 experience a medical disorder sometime this year. Now, the question is are we over diagnosing? I don't know. But 1 in 6, even if that's a little bit high, is extremely high. Like, if we're over diagnosing a little bit, that's still too high. And we need to understand that that is affecting people biologically, socially, spiritually, cognitively, and emotionally. All 5 of those areas for ourselves. And that's whether you're an adult or whether you're youth. And so much more, so more for youth because of those things I shared. So there are multiple diagnoses that we can jump into. We're not going to get into everything here. But the first one is depression. Depression is an understanding of sadness where we isolate ourselves, we get irritated too much, we find ourselves having not enough energy, we lack motivation to do things, we may get hopeless and feel helpless to the point that we could have psychosis or feel suicidal or homicidal. And with teenagers, with youth that we are working with, we need to understand here in the United States that it's about 3.2% as of a year and a half ago. 3.2%, or about 1.9 million teenagers, struggle with depression. Again, not feeling sad, not teenage angst, clinical depression. So much so that it's affecting multiple areas of their life. At the same time, high school students with significant symptoms of depression are more than twice as likely to drop out of high school compared to their peers. That's a significant thing because that affects the rest of their life. If they drop out of school, they don't get their degree, they don't finish educating themselves, have an accomplishment at a key point where they try to launch into their life, there can potentially be a stunted growth there. It's not permanent, it's not absolutely going to happen, but that's a big hurdle to be able to overcome for themselves. Nearly 8 in 10 children, 78.1% of teenagers and youth here in the United States are diagnosed with depression, end up getting into treatment. So the good news is they are receiving treatments. So almost 80% of people diagnosed with depression are getting into treatments. Now, that number could be better, but I will say that that number is much, much better than what it is for adults. I think it's 25% better than what it is for adults. Anxiety is an understanding of us having this, not just being a little stressed or worried, not, oh my goodness, I have a test coming up, am I going to get this job? But every single day for a year, maybe having panic attacks, social anxiety where I can't go out and meet people, not able to go to the grocery store because it's too scary of people judging me or going to do something to me. For anxiety with teenagers, 7.1% of teenagers struggle with anxiety, about 4.4 million here in the United States. That diagnosis of depression and anxiety can be very common. In fact, their ability to have those diagnoses together, and that's much more common as you get older. So the younger may have that common dual diagnosis at a younger age, maybe less likely than when we get older, where it becomes more and more frequent. For people with anxiety, for teenagers with anxiety, 6 in 10, almost a little over 59% of teenagers are getting treatment. Again, that's a much better statistic than it is for adults, but you can actually already see it's less than with going through depression. There's a little bit of stigma that understands just stop feeling so stressed, stop worrying about it. Or with anxiety, a lot of times it can come out as anger. And when we talk about hormones going all over the place, we have stress and we have worry, we have anger because we're being impulsive and not thinking things through. But then when we have anxiety to it, we don't treat it because we think it's these other things, and we're not actually getting them into the services they need. When we go from there, we talk about trauma. Now, there's a great resource out there that you as youth pastors could do. If you would so choose, go find a counselor like I talked about that you really trust, that has those Christian values, and ask them about the ACE study. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the ACE study measures what kind of trauma they experienced. And we find that the higher the ACE score that they have, and it's 0 out of 10, if they get all the way up to a 10, then that's going to dramatically affect everything else in their life, including their lifespan, their ability to find a job, their ability to be educated, their ability to find a significant other, their ability to be able to develop mental illness in the future. And this ACE study talks about trauma, and there's a significant amount of places that trauma can come. It originally started with people in war and then developed into people that were sexually abused. And now we recognize that trauma can happen just simply by understanding that I watched someone get into a car accident and saw them die. I don't know who they are, but me witnessing that gives me nightmares and flashbacks and mood swings and hypervigilance where I can't be alone or have someone stand behind me. So much so that, again, it affects all parts of our lives. So with regards to teenagers, based on that ACE study, 10.6% of youth have been emotionally abused. 28.3% of teenagers have been physically abused in their life, and 20.7 teenagers have been sexually abused. At the same time, with that study, 9.9% of teenagers have been physically neglected, and 14.8% were emotionally neglected. Those are startling statistics. So many of these children have been hurt and wounded, and we need to be able to be present as the church and as a community. Unfortunately, some of the church has done that as well. Another diagnosis is something called ADHD. This is very common. There's also a very similar one called oppositional defiant disorder. And these diagnoses are for people that can't keep attention, that find themselves moving, going so fast. You notice I'm talking fast. That may be true for someone with ADHD. Similarly, oppositional defiant disorder means I'm not listening to authority. I'm not going to do as you say. It's this rude and mean spirit towards other people. And for us to be able to understand with oppositional defiance that can come out as ADHD, it can actually come out a couple other diagnoses as well. But within that, we understand that 9.4% of children, 6.1 million, have received an ADHD diagnosis. There's actually concern at one point that maybe we're overdiagnosing it. It sounds like it's coming down. 9.4 is still high, but there are many people that have that diagnosis. Boys are more likely to receive the diagnosis than girls, 12.9% versus 5.6%. The question though is that because we see men differently than women? For children 3 to 17 within that spectrum, behavioral problems more than 1.1 in 3 that have had some kind of like oppositional defiant conduct disorder type diagnosis where they're having behavioral issues. More than 1 in 3 of those children, more than 33% of them, have either an anxiety disorder, or 1 in 5, about 20%, have a depressive disorder. So if they're having behavioral issues, and this is something we talk about as just kind of a general thing, but has clinical significance, if they are having issues, then most likely it's because of something else. And we have to understand that there is an underlying cause to that. And we clinically know that, statistically see that that's true. Suicide is another significant issue with teenagers. It is the second leading cause of death from 10 to 34. I can't imagine that statistic. Second leading cause. Annually here in the United States, 17.2% of high school students, and within that, 47.7% of LGBTQ students have thought about suicide. 17.2%. Along the understanding of with mental illness, we also have to understand that people try to self-medicate with substances, or they get bored, or they don't know how to socialize, or all these other reasons of why someone might use. For vaping, vaping is a different way of being able to consume through vapor, not burning, substances to ingest into their body that goes through the lungs. And we understand that most of the time it's with nicotine, but you can use other substances like marijuana, methamphetamines, cocaine, heroin, all within those as well. But within that, e-cigarettes are used about 78% of the time among students within this last year here in the United States. A single pod of a vapor contains about 200 puffs, which is about the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes. I've had teenagers that come and say, I use about a pod a day. I use a pack of cigarettes a day. In 2016, 1/3 of US middle school and high school students used e-cigarettes, also used marijuana within that e-cigarettes, 1/3 of them. Within marijuana, though, we understand that there are short and long-term effects of what this has on a person. It affects their body movements, their memory, their ability to think clearly. They actually can develop psychosis, more so with teenagers than with adults. Again, their brain is developing, and if you stunt that growth, that can have long-term effects on an adolescent going into adulthood. People who begin using marijuana before the age of 18 are 4 to 7 times more likely to develop a marijuana use disorder. And in 2015, here in the United States, we understood that about 11 million adults ages 18 to 25 have a substance use disorder and use marijuana in the last year. That's where they're coming from and into. Our teenagers are going into that. At the same time, we understand that alcohol is very prevalent. I am looking through this lens of the United States that has a legal age of 21, where it's illegal until you turn 21 to use. And so within this understanding of that context, even though it is illegal, there from 12 to 20, about 11% of all teenagers have used alcohol. In 2018, 19% of youth ages 12 to 20 and 12% of adults or of the youth have binged drinking. So 19% of teenagers have used alcohol in 2018, and then about 12% of those had binge drank in the last 30 days. Another study reports that about 52% of seniors have drank sometime in the last year, and 37% of 10th graders or 19% of 8th graders have also drank in that year. Opioids are heroin and Percocet and oxycodone and pain relievers that are designed to help get rid of pain, but have a high addictive capacity within them. And here in the United States, we have an opiate problem. And we found that about 57% of teenagers have misused prescription opiates at some point, whether they got them from a friend or a relative. Now, that's not saying 57% of all teenagers have done it. Those that have used that, 57% of them have gotten them from a family friend or from a relative. So if they struggled with it, that's where their source was. So as a church, if we're working with the teenager and the parents and the cousin, we need to be present in their lives because we need to understand all these dynamics that are happening. At the same time, about 20% of 12th graders said they easily could have gotten heroin. Easily gotten heroin. That's a scary, scary statistic. The final thing I want to make sure I talk about within this is that mental illness is not something that is individual based, but is within a system. And so it would be a mistake to miss the fact that we talk about mental illness, we talk about the parents. If a parent has mental illness, we need to understand that it affects the whole system. Same thing is true as if it affects a sibling. Within parents with mental illness, we know that about 8.4 million people in the United States care for an adult parent with mental illness. At the same time, caregivers of adults with mental illness spend an average of 32 hours per week providing unpaid care. And that's taking away from the time that they could be giving to teenagers or to be able to have those connections and attachments to other families. So if your family member has mental illness, we need to understand that that person may need extra care. Church, we have time, we have resources, we have volunteers that could help support these families. We could help with depression for teenagers. We could help with parents that need extra supports and respite care. We could be able to help educate and understand for parents what substance use is. We have that ability, that power, that platform to do so. So let's take it on. So from here, go find those counseling agencies that you can partner with. Keep educating yourself on understanding with this. And at the forefront of your mind, as you're working with people and they just don't seem like they want to talk, go educate yourself on how more you can help that person and keep aware of what some of the signs and symptoms are with that. Again, I encourage you guys. I pray for you. I hope that you are out there. My heart is with every single youth pastor as they go struggle through this, but at the same time have been serving faithfully in everything you guys do. Thank you so much for taking an interest and some time to be able to serve the children and the families that struggle with mental illness. That is my heart and that's my passion. If you guys have any questions, please email me. Please contact me on social media. I would love to sit down and talk with you guys for 30 minutes on Facebook Messenger. I want to see the church be able to grow and to serve these communities. Thank you so much.